David Ubben, who covers Tennessee for The Athletic and also is just a fantastic writer in terms of coming up with angles, coming up with ideas. He interviewed 4 unnamed athletic directors. And this is what one said. I'd say close to 50% of schools and athletic department leaders would navigate their way to yes when asked about would they take money from the Saudis, much like the Saudis have developed the LIV Tour, and it's PIL is the name of the fund, but it's actually just Saudi Arabia money. And it's a lot of money. We're not talking about a few $100 million. We're talking about billions. And the PGA Tour realized that they couldn't match the money. This same source said, quote, if you'd asked me before the LIV PGA Tour came together, I would have said less than 10%, meaning a chance that some school would take Saudi money. Then finishing off the quote, because even the most aggressive and thoughtful athletic directors, everyone is afraid to go first when it comes to the PIF and their involvement in American sports. And the PGA just went first. Some angles that were brought up by Josh Pate that make a lot of sense. And that is the ACC is going to be in trouble. The Pac-12, 10, whatever they end up with, 14, is in big time trouble. People don't even want to put them on TV for nothing. And I could easily see the PIL or Saudis getting involved with the ACC, but first the Pac-12. I think Pac-10, whatever they end up being. So I could see that happening. The other reason I could see that happening, and I believe will happen, to be real honest with you, is because you have a more liberal attitude out west. And I think a lot of people will say to themselves, oh, let's move on from 9/11. I mean, I'm not. I've not forgiven anybody for what happened. And I realize that these people may be different people and all of that. But it still would be a factor in my mind. The Pac-12 is dying on the vine. To think that they wouldn't take money, to me, sounds a little bit crazy. So the way this could work, as Josh Pate had pointed out, you could essentially set up, now with streaming, you could set up a Pac-12 network and you're airing their games since nobody else wants to do it. Who cares if you lose money or not? You're essentially going to promote and what's called sports washing. You're going to sports wash your reputation. If you lose $100 million a year, Caleb, that's like you and me losing $5 a year. That's nothing. So I think it will happen, and I think it'll happen by next football season. That being said, how do you think that would affect people's thoughts on either that conference that they do it first with or college football as a whole?
You know, here's where I think it's trickier. I actually break with you on this. I don't think the Pac-12 would not care about this, and here's why. They don't care that these Pac-12 teams don't care that much about football to begin with. So I think it's easy for them to take the principled stance. If Saudi Arabia buys my team, I'm not going to watch them. Whereas people in this, I think it'd be more likely if Saudi Arabia bought an SEC team, the SEC fan bases wouldn't go. I mean, look, you talk about liberal versus conservative. Golf is a very conservative sport. I mean, let's call it what it is. It's a very conservative sport. The Saudis just bought off all professional golf right now. Golf fans are still going to show up. And this is the peak like patriotism crew, and they've just totally I mean, there was a golfer just a few weeks ago that went on TV and said we need to forgive for 9/11. I mean, the nerve of someone to say that. Like, I mean, you know,
so it's time to move on. And then he said that, well, let me rephrase it. And it just got worse.
Yeah. And it's one of those where it's always been funny because Saudi Arabia, where they've always had this weird left, if you want to do left-right dichotomy, whereas I think, two people on the left maybe too willing to get past 9/11, but also people on the right are a little more tied to oil, and Saudi Arabia is just the oil supplier of the world. So I don't know how this ends up. I mean, look, sports leagues for a long time every sports league has been letting Honduras, China, whatever oppressive regime or government you name, produce their jerseys, market them to their fans and audience, and nobody's really cared. I mean, how long has Michael Jordan been using Chinese slave labor to make his shoes? And he's the most beloved athlete of the 21st century.
And it was
And
a big deal, 20 years ago? But it's just we've grown accustomed to it now, and it's not a big deal. It was Bryson DeChambeau who said that, quote, "Look toward the pathway to peace and forgiveness" when talking about 9/11. Just Bryson DeChambeau, just shut the hell up. Don't do any
yeah,
more interviews. I mean,
the pathway towards peace and forgiveness is for this Saudi regime to be overthrown and somebody and a more democratic regime take over there. That's peace and forgiveness.
I could not say it better myself. There's no way I could phrase that better than what you just said. Rocky Top Tom says, if Saudi money gets in college sports, I'm burning everything college related that I have. Once again, the theme continues: money equals problems, and nobody does a thing about it. They just want more, especially in the golf world. But we've seen that in the college football world as well. But I'm curious, guys, if it is Pac-12 and it's somewhat removed from the SEC, would you have as strong a stance? And particularly asking Tom, but you're just, if it's removed from the SEC, if it's removed from your favorite school, be it Tennessee, or we got a lot of Georgia fans, we got a lot of South Carolina fans that tune in. Um, if it's insulated from your conference in your school, is it a no big deal thing, or is it, like Tom said, it affects it across the board and he's burning stuff?
I mean, look, I've had a issue. I've been screaming about the Saudi Arabian thing for 20 years, and for me personally, look, I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to not watch football, even if they buy out, even if they purchase the SEC. I would not watch it, because here's my take on it, Dave. If you got a problem with it, it's the government's job to regulate these type of things. It's the government's job to step in and say you can't do business with Saudi Arabia or China. Don't blame the leagues and the businesses that look. Businesses and corporations and moneymakers are in the business of making money. That's what they do. They're amoral. There's no such thing as morality in markets and capitalism. Now, we believe in a capitalistic society because we think that's the best way to uplift communities. But then we believe that the government is the one to step in and kind of be the referees to say, okay, we got to set some moral boundaries in place. I would think a moral boundary would be, don't do business with the country that facilitated the worst terrorist attack on our grounds in history. So how am I supposed to blame a conference or even the PGA Golf Tour when our government's out here? Our government makes Saudi Arabia our top ally. How can I sit there and blame these leagues when, and it was 50 years ago where Richard Nixon opened up trade with China? I mean, if you don't blame the NBA, blame Richard Nixon and blame every president after who has allowed us to trade as a country to trade with China. So I know people are like, oh, government get out of everything. Well, this is what the government's job is. If the government doesn't do this, then we might as well just not have one, period, and just have anarchy.
Yep. I'll tell you what to look for, and I think it'll happen fairly quickly. Is they're they've invested in a part of an ownership group that is trying to purchase an NFL team, which I believe is the Washington Commanders. Correct me if I'm wrong, Caleb. But once that happens, it is the next step. They're going to go after college football. It's the second most popular sport to the NFL in the nation. It's exactly what's going to happen. And then you get in sort of a grassroots. I mean, imagine if you could change the mindset of an entire generation, a group that wasn't alive during 9/11, and suddenly Saudi Arabia is just another country. And if you could do that, what better place to do it than in the time in which minds and opinions are being developed in that 18 to 22 range? And what better way to do it if you're talking sports is college football? That would be even bigger than the NFL.
And don't even
for them.
Oh yeah, and we haven't even thought about this. So Saudi Arabia does this. What's to stop Iran to then come in and say, you know what? Saudi Arabia is going to do this. Why can't we? What makes us any less moral than Saudi Arabia? And they would have a point, by the way. And so I know we have sanctions on Iran right now, but Iran could then come in and say, well, why do you have sanctions on us and not Saudi Arabia? If they can do this, government, let us do it. And then you could see Iran start to buy teams. And then the entire Middle East proxy war that's happening right now, for those that don't know, Saudi Arabia and Iran are basically like in a Cold War that's worse than the United States and the Soviet Union was. Like one side pulls the trigger, you're going to have nuclear war in the Middle East at some point. What happens when American entertainment becomes the proxy war for those two countries?
Scary stuff. Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope it doesn't happen. But if I had to bet a mortgage payment, let's say it does within 5 years. I hope and pray I'm wrong. Like literally pray. Like when I say you brought this topic up, and it will be a part of my prayers.